uncle's old company. And he said basically there were programs that even though he was cleared to do all of this, they basically said, you don't have a need to know the details of anything we're doing. So basically, he would just rubber stamp what they were telling him, what they were doing with the money, and where it was going. And so exactly where are the checks and balances in a system like this? And this is why back in, and I don't know if you know this story, Will, back in 1994, it was this time of year, and after I had met with the CIA director and I was meeting with some people up in New York, with the UN, I was asked to go to a meeting at the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the chief counsel for the committee at that time was a guy named Dick D'Amato, no relation to the Senator D'Amato, but he worked with Senator Byrd of West Virginia, who was chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and we were sitting in the big chamber with the huge table and the brass name tags at each senator's seat, and we were meeting with a think tank head and myself and this man who had a top secret clearance and also had subpoena power on behalf of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And he told me that he had seen evidence that things were going on related to the ET and UFO subject, but that with a subpoena power and a top secret clearance on behalf of the committee that wrote the checks for the U.S. government, he could not penetrate them. And he looked at me squarely in the eyes and he said, Dr. Greer, you're dealing with the varsity team of all what he called black projects. And he says, good luck. And then he informed me of something which at the time I thought couldn't be seen. He says, well, we have concluded that there's upwards of $100 billion a year that we have no idea where it's going. Now, this is in 1994, 19 years ago. And of course, that's when $1 billion was more than $1 billion today. And if you connect the dots, then going forward a decade or 8 years later, when Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, the day before 9/11, said, well, there's about $2.3 trillion, with a T, trillion dollars missing out of the Department of Defense budget over the last few decades, that we really don't know where it's gone. And, this is the kind of thing where now you're talking serious money and serious power, and who's overseeing this?
Right. Well, that's an interesting point. When I worked at Atlantic Command, I worked with a number of operational programs, and those programs were supported by many other agencies, one of them including the National Security Agency, NSA. Well, I worked in programs and budgeting and technology support, and one day I was given a sheet of paper and asked to approve about 5 classified programs that just had code names, like Blue Flash or Wonder Spear, and so I said, well, what do these programs do? And they said, oh, I'm sorry, you're not cleared to have the need to know. You don't have the need to know, but trust us, these programs support your operations. And I said, look, I can't certify these, I can't justify these, I can't sign off on them unless I know what they do. And there was a big row. I said, look, you tell the director of NSA that Atlantic Command's not signing off, at least not in my office, until we have someone read into those programs. And sure enough, they sent folks down, and we sat down behind closed doors in a secure intelligence facility, and they read us in. We had to sign many papers, sign our lives away once again. But we found out, the programs actually did do something for us, but I wasn't going to begin to vouch for that until I knew what the heck they were, So not everybody does that.
Right.
Yeah. But, that leads to another area, and if you read some of the literature and listen to what many people in the public believe, is that the military doesn't really take the UFO subject seriously. And it has been my experience, and yours as well, that they take it very seriously.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I'm going to talk about some specific examples, if you'd like,
about
meetings that we have had where the subject has come up, and there has been not only great interest but great discussion. I thought I'd start back in '89. I don't know I've ever mentioned this particular situation to you. I worked as a liaison to U.S. Space Command and had the chance to spend about a week inside Cheyenne Mountain. It's called a Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station, even though it's in the heart of a mountain.
Right.
With lakes big enough to water ski on, the vault doors, the 3-story buildings on springs, a little rock and roll in World War III, they hoped. At any rate, we had access to the large tracking consoles in the Space Command Center there, and there were 54 categories of objects that were tracked. And the Navy Lieutenant Colonel who was taking us around had top secret compartmented access clearance. He could basically talk to the Almighty, And he said, "Is there anything you'd like to see?" I said, "Well, I see you've got a button here. You press that, and it says foreign airline." So he pressed the button, and sure enough, I always saw the Lufthansa flights going into New York, and it was very interesting. He said, "Anything else?" I said, "Well, yeah, let's look at 54, category 54, UFOs." And so he pressed the button on the console, and immediately was displayed access denied.
Wow.
And I just thought that was really interesting, because here was a guy who supposedly had clearance to look at anything, and but not this.
Not that. That's correct. Right.
Yeah, we can move on to a few years later in '92. I had the chance to talk with the then Director for Intelligence, the J2 at Atlantic Command. And this was just an informational briefing that I was giving him as a courtesy to let him know some of the work that CSETI and had been doing worldwide on the subject. It was something I thought he would not generally have access to, even though he was a Director for Intelligence. And we got to talking about he was also a submariner. And I asked him at one point, I said, "Admiral, have you ever come across any information from submarine intelligence units of large aircraft carrier size underwater objects going at speeds approaching Mach?" And of course that's quite an unusual occurrence. And he looked at me, he said, well, there's some strange things reported from time to time, but there are always those computer glitches. And then we just went on to something else. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yes, right.
Yeah,
that's right. Oh, that's an anomaly. We won't talk about that one. Yeah,
right. Yeah. There may be such things happening, but obviously that's just a computer glitch.
Right. We have one of our disclosure witnesses who was actually on a submarine when they went out on a mission, and there were a couple of underwater of these objects their mission really was to go under and track, but they used the euphemism magnetic anomalies underwater, and so they went and so they were looking for these magnetic. Sure enough, one of these things came by, and there were then two, and they got on either side of this nuclear submarine and took its drivetrain offline. Basically, they couldn't go up, down, forward, back, nothing. And at one point, they tracked one of these objects going underwater at 450 knots. Now, to give you an idea, that's basically the speed of a jet in the air, but this is in water, which is 1,000 times denser than air or whatever it is. But he said with no wake.
Yes.
So the way these objects operate, it creates a space-time bubble that it moves through that doesn't then disturb the water or the air. And he said that's quite obvious. It was quite fascinating. So sounds like an ice cream truck.
That's a incoming call I've just dispatched with. I'm sorry.
Oh, so that's all right. Yeah. So, it's very interesting. Yeah, so, there have been some other meetings as well. It'd be great to hear.
Yes, and I used to, in my work at Atlantic Command, I used to have to go up to the Pentagon frequently, and took the helo up there, landed in front of the Pentagon on the helo pad there from Norfolk to D.C., and I would generally stop in to see a former director of intelligence that we had, and he was now the Joint Staff Deputy Director for Intelligence. And so I made an appointment to see him, and I thought it was about time that I brought up the subject of some CSETI work, particularly because when I was working at the time as your military advisor, we were trying to find someone in Department of Defense with whom, or some entity in DOD, with whom we could deconflict any field operations we were doing, because at the time DOD was doing a lot of counter-drug operations things, and here CSETI had teams of people out with high-powered lights and lasers, and we didn't want to interfere with any government drug bust and let them know about what was going on. So I talked to the Admiral. I said, Admiral, on another subject, suppose that there was a group of retired and active duty military, former astronauts, senior technical people, and other civilians who were in fact doing field work, communicating with and vectoring in extraterrestrial spacecraft, and they wanted to deconflict those operations with DOD. Who would they talk to? Just hypothetically, of course. And the Admiral's eyes narrowed, and he looked at me and said, this isn't hypothetical, is it, Will? I said, well, sir, honestly, it's not. He said, I used to know who those people were that you would talk with. Give me 24 hours, and I'll get back to you. So I went back to Norfolk, and sure enough, the Admiral's aide called me. He said, here's a number for a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Intelligence Command at the time, called AFINT, and call him, and he will begin to put you in touch with some folks. So I called this colonel, who, when I got him on the phone, assured me he was very uncomfortable and not at all happy about being directed to talk to me on this subject, but that I was to call the director of the Foreign Aerospace Science and Technology Center, FASTIC at the time, out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I could go from there. So I called this bird colonel out there, and as you may remember, we set up a meeting, you, me, and I think it was Dr. Scott Jones at FASTIC, Foreign Aerospace Science and Technology Center, to brief them and on what CSETI was doing, and also to ask if there was some entity with whom we could deconflict our operations. And that meeting was very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because we gave them a couple of briefing books. The director was then transferred. He told me to contact his successor. He was transferred within 30 days, and basically the minutes of the entire meeting went into a black hole, into the Mathmos. So the information surfaced once again many years later, I understand, at White House staff. But I was pleased to be able to set up a meeting at the Joint Staff there, J2, the Director for Intelligence, back in '97.
Yeah, and what Commander Miller is referring to is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, although they call it Joint Staff, right, at the Pentagon.
Right. Yeah, and that was a meeting with you and me, and I think Ed Mitchell was there,
right.
astronaut Ed Mitchell, among others. And the Admiral took this briefing with the same level of gravity and interest as he would any other national security, national intelligence matter. So when folks say that the military is not interested in this subject, that is obviously not the case and has not been our experience.
No, and in fact, I remember that we were slotted for a certain amount of time, and he kept turning to his aide saying, cancel this, cancel. It kept extending because he had tremendous interest in what was being shared.
Yes. It was also a little interesting aside. As I was leaving, the Admiral's aide turned to me and said, the subject of Majestic MJ-12 came up, and there's been a lot of debate as to, whether that's real, whether it ever existed. And he said, we know it exists. We here at the Intelligence Directorate for the Joint Staff just don't have the need to know what they do. Right. And I found that to be a very interesting statement.
A very important statement, and of course, if you look at this